It was a Sunday afternoon when my granddaughter Emma ran toward me with a face I will never forget. She was 8 years old, and she was not a child who shouted. She was quiet, thoughtful, sure of what she said. But that afternoon she shouted, loud and clear, "Run, Grandpa!" I took her by the shoulders and asked what was happening. She said only, "They're coming for you. I heard them. Run." I did not understand immediately. I thought she was playing, or had misheard something, or was confused. But Emma does not joke about things like that. I always knew that. I went inside. And what I to understand that Sunday, you have to understand the year that came before it. A year in which my son Brian and my daughter-in-law Sandra started behaving differently. Fewer visits, more questions about money and property. Once Sandra asked me in passing whether the house was insured and whose name was on the deed. I told her mine. She nodded and changed the subject. I did not give it much thought. I am a man who trusts his children because I always believed that was something a father could give. I was wrong not in trusting, but in not checking what was being built behind that trust without my knowledge or consent. If this is the first time you are watching this channel, welcome. Stay until the end. This story is not frightening in the dramatic sense. There is no violence. It is frightening in a quieter and longer-lasting way. It is the story of a man his own children tried to exclude from his home, and of an 8-year-old granddaughter who shouted. Subscribe and leave a comment telling me where you are watching from. I answer everyone. This story has an ending I did not expect, and that taught me more than 40 years of work and goodness toward the world ever did. She taped a drawing to the refrigerator. My name is Harold Dolan. I am 74 years old, retired architect, 39 years in the profession in Indianapolis. My Margaret died of cancer 3 years ago. I live alone in the house in Indianapolis, where Brian and Patricia grew up, where Margaret and I built everything we were together. I know every corner of that house, every wall, every window, every repair. Emma is Patricia's daughter, my granddaughter, who comes every Saturday and Sunday. She is 8 years old and has Margaret's eyes and Margaret's way of listening. When Emma says something, it is true. I always knew that, and it saved me. Brian married Sandra, a good woman at her core, but whose mother Donna is a figure who deserves a separate explanation. Donna is a 65-year-old woman who all her life enjoyed managing situations in which she formerly had no authority. She entered our lives slowly. A suggestion here, a word of concern there. Worry about Brian's health and about the condition of the house. Never openly aggressive, never directly demanding, but always present with a plan that revealed itself in small steps, each one separately insignificant, together nearly complete and invisible until you look back at all of them together. Never openly aggressive, never directly demanding, but always present with a plan nearly complete. A week before that Sunday, Brian suggested I sign a power of attorney. He said it was for tax purposes, to simplify administration, for my peace of mind in old age. I asked him exactly what the document covered. He said, the usual things. I did not sign. I told him we would go over it together with an attorney. Brian said an attorney was not necessary, that it was standard. I told him I do not sign anything without an attorney. He left unhappy. That was the 5th or 6th such conversation in the year. Always something small. Always something that supposedly did not require a lawyer. Always. That Sunday afternoon, Brian and Sandra went to pick up Donna for lunch. Emma stayed with me in the garden. We were talking about school and about a cat that came regularly to the fence. Then Emma stopped. She looked at me with the look children have when they know something that adults do not know they know. She said, "Grandpa, I heard Donna and Dad talking about your house. She said it was going to be theirs." I asked her when she had heard that. She said, "Last week, when they thought I was asleep in the bedroom." And then she added in a quiet, serious voice, "Run, Grandpa." I went inside and opened the drawer where I keep my documents. They were there, but something was off. Some folders had been moved. One was open, and I never leave it open. I picked up the phone and called my attorney, Dennis, an old friend from my years at the firm who had handled my property matters for a long time. I said only, "Dennis, I have a feeling something is happening with my property. Can anyone do something without my signature?" Dennis was quiet for a moment and then said, "Come in first thing tomorrow. Bring every document you have, everything." The tone of his voice told me he understood the seriousness. Dennis came the next morning and sat at the kitchen table. He reviewed the documents carefully and in silence. Then he asked whether Brian had ever had access to my bank accounts. I told him Brian sometimes helped with payments. Dennis said we should go check whether anything had changed. We went to the bank together. There we learned that 1 week earlier, Brian, using an old banking power of attorney from 2018 that I had signed for a single specific purpose and believed to be no longer active, had attempted to make a change on one of my accounts. The bank had stopped it because he did not have a bit of a middle of. I was sitting in the bank listening to what they told me, and I understood something. It was not anger I felt. Anger comes when you are surprised. I was not surprised. I was sad, because everything Emma had said and everything Dennis had found confirmed what for a full year I had refused to see clearly. That my son, whom I love, was participating in something that was not for my benefit. That it had not been impulsive, that it had been planned. That Donna had been sitting at some table building that plan with patience, step by step, for someone who cannot even stand up to her. And leave me a comment right now. Have you ever had a child or grandchild who told you something that saved you from a mistake? Or someone who saw what you had decided not to see, because seeing it would have cost you something? Because that sentence from Emma, "Run, Grandpa," was not a child's drama. It was the clearest thing said in that house in the year of the powers of attorney and the questions and the plans I knew nothing about. An 8-year-old girl saw, and she did not stay quiet. And I stopped being the man who trusts because he does not want to see. Dennis did several concrete things that same week. He revoked the old banking power of attorney completely. He drafted new documents establishing that without my personal presence and signature, no one can modify anything in my accounts or my real estate. He reported the attempted change to the bank, which made its own internal record. And he prepared a new draft of my will because the old one had a clause that under a certain interpretation could have been used against me. Dennis said, "You did the right thing coming in. It should have been done earlier." I said, "It never should have needed to be done at all." But Brian called 3 days later. His voice was careful, not remorseful, careful. He said he had heard I had been at the bank with an attorney. He asked what was going on. I said, "Brian, I know about the attempted change on the account. I know about the old power of attorney. And I know about the conversation Emma heard." The silence on the phone was long and full and heavy. Then he said it could be explained. I told him, I do not need an explanation. I need a conversation, a real conversation, at the table, without Donna and without Sandra. Brian said he would come. Brian came alone, without Sandra, without Donna. He sat at the kitchen table and was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Dad, it is not what you think." I told him, "Brian, I am not saying what I think. I am saying what I know. There is a difference." He nodded. Then he said, "Donna told me it was your wish, that you wanted to get the paperwork sorted." I told him I did not sign anything. That is the end of the story about my wishes. Brian looked at the table. Then he said, "I know, Dad," slowly and quietly. I believe that was the first Patricia, my daughter and Emma's mother, called that same day. She was upset, not at me, but for me. She said, "Dad, I had no idea." I believe her. Patricia was always the one who asks and checks and does not like ambiguity. She told me Emma had come home and told her what she had heard because she knew it was important and that Grandpa had to know. I told her, "Emma saved me from a mistake." Patricia cried a little. Then she said, "What now, Dad?" I said, "We continue." just differently, with better documents and a clear understanding of who is what in this family. I saw Donna once, a week after everything. She was at Brian's apartment when I went to pick up some papers. I had not planned to see her. She was in the kitchen and looked at me with that calm, assessing expression I had seen so many times without reading it correctly. She said, "Harold, I hope there are no misunderstandings." I looked at her and said only, "Donna, in my life I built every space where I worked and lived. I know what something built well looks like and what something built badly looks like. This was not built well. I left. We have not spoken since." Emma came the following Saturday as always. She brought a drawing, a house with a garden and a cat by the fence, and Grandpa in his armchair. She taped it to the refrigerator without explanation. We sat and ate and talked about school and the cat. I did not tell her what had happened. An 8-year-old does not need to carry the weight of the adult chaos she interrupted with one sentence. But I did tell her one thing. "Emma, thank you for telling me." She looked at me the way children look when they do not understand why you are thanking them for something obvious. And she said, "Well, the will is now different. It is not punitive toward Brian. I did not want to punish a son who was weak, not evil, but it is precise. Patricia and Brian inherit equally, with clear conditions that prevent either of their spouses from taking the other's share without the consent of the co-heir." Dennis said it was a standard protection clause. I told him I was glad there was a standard, because standards exist because situations like this happen often enough that someone had to think them through. Now it is thought through. Now it is written. Now it is protected the way it should have been from the beginning. Brian and I have a new pattern. He comes less often than before, but he comes. Sandra rarely comes on her own. I do not forbid it, but she does not come by her own initiative. We talk about daily things and sometimes serious ones. Once Brian said, "Dad, I know this is hard for you." I told him, "Brian, it is not hard. It is clear. Hard would have been not knowing. This is just different." He nodded. I believe he understands the difference between hard and clear. I think he prefers clear, but it took him time to recognize that and to admit it to himself. I have a photograph on the hallway wall. Margaret and me on the terrace of this same house, 1987. Margaret is laughing at something I am saying, and I am looking at her with that expression I only had with her. Every time I walk past that photograph, I stop for a second, not from sadness, but from gratitude, for having had her, for having built together something worth protecting, and from the conviction that she, if she were alive, the morning after Emma's shout would have called Dennis, and then asked me why I had waited so long to be serious about what was ours. I have 74 years, and I live in the house where I have lived for 40 years. I have Margaret's garden that blooms on its own every spring. I have a granddaughter who comes every Saturday and Sunday, and who taped a drawing to the refrigerator. I have an attorney I can call without hesitating, and I have a clear picture of who I am, what I have, and how it is protected. It is not a picture without pain. There is in it the pain that comes when you understand that loving an adult child is more complicated than you imagined. But it is clear, and clarity is always better than illusion. There is a kind of kindness that does damage, not to those it is directed at, to the one who gives it. For years I was accessible, warm, understanding. I did not ask questions when I should have. I did not ask for explanations when they were needed. I did not react to signals I saw but chose not to see because seeing them would have cost me a discomfort I preferred to avoid. That was not weakness in the dramatic sense. It was habit. The habit of a man raised in a home where problems were solved with silence and patience. Silence and patience do not solve. Emma asked me once, weeks after everything, if I could show her how to draw an architectural floor plan. We sat at the table and drew the floor plan of her room. Bed, desk, wardrobe, window. I explained why some walls are thicker than others, why the windows are where they are, what each line means. She was attentive and precise, and asked the right questions. At the end, she looked at the drawing and said, "Grandpa, so every house has a plan from the beginning?" I told her, "Yes, Emma, every house has a plan, and every good plan protects the people who live inside." She looked at Donna, as far as I know, stopped going to Brian's apartment after everything. I do not look for details. I only know that Brian speaks differently than before, without those phrases that sound like someone else taught him to say them. Maybe it is temporary, maybe not. I am not naive enough to think one crisis changed everything for the better forever. But it did change some things. The documents are clear, the will is protected, the power is revoked, and Brian knows that I know. That is not a small thing. It is, in fact, everything that should have existed from the beginning. Clarity without illusion, limits. That Sunday taught me something about parenthood that had not been clear to me. Being a good parent does not mean being available without limits. It means being an example. The example I gave Brian for years was, trust, do not ask, give space, be good. Those are beautiful values. But alongside someone like Donna, they become instructions for being used. I did not understand that being a good man does not mean being a man without limits when it comes to property and legal matters. Emma somehow already knew that at 8 years old. Children sometimes know what we have forgotten through habit and through fear of the difficult conversations we need to have. The drawing is still on the refrigerator. The house with the garden, the cat by the fence, Grandpa in his armchair. Emma drew it with markers without any particular intention. She just wanted to draw something and tape it up because she liked it. But every time I walk into the kitchen, I look at that drawing and see in it everything I have and everything worth protecting. I have 74 years and still many mornings at that table. Still many Saturdays and Sundays. Still many floor plans I will draw with Emma while she grows and becomes more and more like Margaret. The house stands, with rebar, protected, and alive. There is one thing about that Sunday that still sometimes stops me. If it had not been for Emma, I do not know when I would have found out. Maybe never, maybe too late. Maybe the power of attorney would have been signed under different circumstances. Maybe the will would have stayed with that vulnerable clause. Maybe everything would have arranged itself to a point of no return, while I still believed we were a happy family. Emma was 8 years old, and she shouted, and she saved what her grandfather had built over 40 years. And she does not know that, and she does not need to. Dennis asked me once, between papers and stamps, how I was feeling about all of it. I said fine. He asked if I meant it. I told him, Dennis, the strangest thing is I feel better than I have in the last 10 years. Not happier, better. Like an architect who finally saw that one wall in the house had no rebar. Everything looked fine from the outside, but if something hit hard enough, the wall would fall. Now the rebar is inside. Dennis laughed and said it was a good metaphor for a will. I told him it was not a metaphor only for the will. It was Emma keeps coming every Saturday and Sunday. Sometimes we draw floor plans. Sometimes we talk about the cat. Sometimes we simply sit quietly and eat together. She grows faster than I am ready for, and she looks more and more like Margaret, in the way she listens, in the way she tells the truth without cruelty. 8 years old, and she already knows something many adults never learn, that telling someone run is sometimes an act of love, that warning someone you love is not rudeness but responsibility, that you stay quiet only when you have nothing to say, not when you are afraid of the consequences. I will leave you with a question that belongs not to me but to you. Is there someone in your life, a child, a grandchild, a friend, who told you something that you perhaps refused to hear because you thought you knew better? And were they right? I ask because for a year I listened to signs and refused to recognize them until an 8-year-old shouted. Limits within a family are not coldness. They are architecture. And good architecture holds people together the right way, with load-bearing walls that are properly reinforced, with space that is protected because someone thought ahead. Write to me, who told Emma keeps coming every Saturday and Sunday. Sometimes we draw floor plans. Sometimes we talk about the cat. Sometimes we simply sit and eat together without any agenda. She grows faster than I am ready for, and looks more and more like Margaret, in the way she listens, in the way she tells the truth without cruelty. 8 years old, and she already knows something many adults never learn, that telling someone run can be an act of love. That warning someone you love is not rudeness but responsibility. That you stay quiet only when you have nothing to say, not when you are afraid of the consequences.